Hi Research Dragons. So this is the last part of the My Research video to show you how you have mixed measures, qualitative, quantitative, and the issue that's presenting today, which is COVID, and how we have to answer all kinds of questions that are social in nature, psychological in nature, epidemiological or medical in nature, and how all of those things are coming together to create the mess that we have at hand, and how are we going to ever understand this. So the secret weapon of doing this kinds of research is not only the fact that it's qualitative and quantitative and mixed measure, it's also applied. So what we learn from this, we're going to apply to this situation. It's an applied research, and we're using archival data. We're using what's published by the country in their public health records, in their legal records, in their interviews, what they say, what they're doing, interviewing people. This is the qualitative part, that are there on the ground. So my fellow researchers who are actually going in to those shanty villages, who are actually going into the Aboriginal villages. In the United States, we found one of the highest infection rates was, again, with the forgotten population, the Native Americans, which have a very high infection rate. And so now people there are starting to go into the reservations, and we're looking at what they're publishing as well. And we're doing compare and contrast kinds of things with that data. So see, it's really interesting to do that kind of research. It's actually research that people have interesting questions about, and someone else is doing all your work in terms of collecting the data, which is exactly the situation. So we're kind of compiling it and looking for things that we didn't know were there. Okay, so in that big pile of data are other comparisons that you can make that maybe people aren't looking for those patterns, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, there's that pattern. We should have looked at that. So that's what we're doing. So the secret weapon is in your empirical realization. And what is an empirical realization? You have an empirical realization of your independent variables and one of your dependent variables. So my independent variables that we're looking at, my team of researchers, is country. So country is an independent variable, and we have several levels of country. We have the United States, Canada, South Africa, and Australia. Okay, and the dependent measures, we have things like testing and things like infection rates and things like death rates and things like all kinds of questions that we're looking at. And we also have other independent variables like infection rates between males, between females, between this minority or that minority, and Caucasians, between different political groups, like mitigation. One political group more likely to mitigate versus another political group. One type of research might be what happens with the infection rates now and after Friday the 15th of May, when Ohio started opening up. And you could compare Ohio pre and post open up dates, Massachusetts or any state you'd like. Okay, did they actually get an increase in cases? Did they not? What do people believe about COVID? I heard today some people saying it was all a hoax. What myths are out there? What about stress for people who are physicians or nurses or something like that? What about the stress of that? What do people know about COVID? Do they know anything about COVID? And does that shape their attitude? And does that shape their desire to mitigate? So you have the Prime Minister of England who did contract COVID, and he was in intensive care, and he was very sick. And he is reluctant to open back up. He's very slow to do it, perhaps because he knows what happened. Does having the disease make you more wary or more willing to quarantine? What are people's attitudes about quarantine? So there's so many questions that you can ask in terms of research. So if you're interested in at all in doing any of this kind of research, just drop me a line, let me know, and that would be great. So the empirical realizations, or the operational definitions of your independent and dependent variables, make your study. Remember, I was telling you about testing. When we went to Swaziland, they took our temperature and ta-da, you're tested. No, you took my temperature and it was 5,000 degrees out. So of course everybody's hot. But what do you mean by testing? You know, is the temperature enough? Is the nasal swab, is that the test that everybody's using? What about an oral swab? What about serology? Massachusetts went to serology for very quickly. I remember people when this was happening after March 10th, and they started doing the wine with DeWine. Okay, for those of you who are out of state, our governor is called, his last name is DeWine, and he does these daily briefings with the director of public health. And they start to call these daily briefings wine with DeWine because everybody's drinking wine while he's talking. And the public health director is Amy Acton, Dr. Acton, and they call it Snackton with Acton. So those are kind of interesting. But the funny thing about this was they were noticing that, well, Ohio is doing a lot to quarantine, and we're keeping people home, and we're doing great. Okay? And then Dr. Acton said, well, we are testing only people we're testing are people who are admitted to the hospital. So those numbers that we're getting for the infection rate are only the people who are admitted to the hospital, not the ones who are tested and who may have tested positive but weren't admitted to the hospital, not the people who got a positive test from their private physician and their private physician said, go home, it'll be okay. Not people who were asymptomatic, not people who felt like they had it and didn't want to be tested. So we don't know about that whole segment. So what is testing? Okay, and there are a lot of different types of tests. In research methods, I often talk about the different types of tests for different types of products. And so if you took me for research methods, then you know we talk about pregnancy tests. And some pregnancy tests are more sensitive than other pregnancy tests. So some tests you know right away, and some tests, they may be wrong for a while. And we also talk about condoms. What is the best condom? And it's all about research. This one's a better condom than that one because this one is more durable than that one. And what makes you think that the test that they're using, if they're using the same test, nasal or oral or serology or whatever they're using, what makes you think that there aren't different types of tests that are more sensitive than others? Of course there are, right? The other day on the news, they said that the test that they use at the White House, which is made by Abbott Company, has a 50% false negative rate. That means 50% of the time it says that you're negative when really you're positive. That's like just flipping a coin. 50% false negative rate. Okay? So we're not using the same tests. Okay? There's a problem right there. There's 50 states, you know, and territories and all that. And we're not using the same tests. And we're probably not using the same tests from country to country. And we're probably not processing them at the same places and in the same way with the same procedure. So your empirical realization or your definition of testing really does magnify and have a direct bearing on your results. Okay? So when you start talking about research, you have to think of all of these things. Controlled studies, how you're going to control these things. Is it uniform? Is it not uniform? And, you know, we live in a democracy where you have a free market economy. So I can have a product, and this guy can make a product, and this guy can make a product, and we can all use them for the same thing. But how do we know whose product is better? And which one are we using to get a national standard? See, that's an issue. And who are we saying we're testing? If Ohio has this low rate, but they're only testing people who are admitted to the hospital, how do you base that, compare that to another state that's testing in drive-up testing, and they're including everybody who tests positive in their statistics? Oh my God, they look like they're really high. Ohio must be doing something right. No, Ohio is only testing those people that are admitted to the hospital. So we have to be unified and on board for these empirical realizations when we say we're testing. We all have to know what we mean by the word testing if you're going to do research, and try and get a grip on what's happening around the world. And then there's the political thing. So no political leader wants bad results in their country. Our president certainly doesn't, and I'm sure the South African president doesn't, and any other kind of president doesn't want to know that, as our prime minister doesn't want to know that as well. And they've come out and said that, if we're testing, we're just going to find more positive people, so maybe we shouldn't test as much. Like, oh my God. So sometimes it's just really interesting to see how people who don't have a scientific background or a research background try and get a grip on research questions, and that's what these are. They're just basically research questions. That doesn't even consider the testing that goes into developing a vaccine. So there's so many questions you can ask in terms of COVID. How are we all going to go back to school in the fall? Are we going to go back to school in the fall? What happens to sports like, I don't know, wrestling, where everybody's sweating on each other? Are we not going to have wrestling anymore? Are we not going to have football anymore? How are we going to do that? But you must have faith, because we will figure this out. We figured out many more illnesses in the past, okay? And out of chaos comes order, always. We learn things from the mistakes of the past. That's why it's so very important for us to get the research right. And we should not stop at just qualitative or quantitative or mixed measures. We need all of it. And we need empirical designs, and we need qualitative designs. We need to look at people's feelings, and we need to interview people, qualitative. We need to do mathematical, quantitative, and we need to put them together, and we need to think of unique and different ways of measuring that sort of thing. And we need to know what the ratios are from false positive to false negatives. Everybody has to be on the same page. We have to be uniform. And that's how we get a handle on this type of research. So these are the kinds of questions that I'm looking for help with. If anybody wants to do that, no pressure. But it's very, very interesting to me to see how we're going to figure this out in terms of, should we be opening up? Should we not be opening up? What are the contagion rates going to be in a couple of weeks? What should we be doing about this, right? Are there safe sports? Are there not safe sports? What about the lawsuits that are going to, and they will come. So there will be some forensic questions and legal questions. It's going to touch every area of interest. Every field is going to have an effect of COVID. So you need to get the research right. And that's what we're doing now. There's just so many applications for all of these different things. So I hope I've given you something over these videos to think about. You can do anything in criminal justice, anything related to your job if you're working, anything related to what you want to do in terms of your area of interest. You pick it, you let me know. If you want to work with me, you let me know. If maybe we do go back to conferences, God, please help us. I hope we do. I would be very happy to take an online student to come and share with this and maybe get your name in a publication. But you need to follow your heart, and you need to follow your intellectual curiosity for research, and just let your imagination go wild. You've been doing research your whole life. You just haven't called it research. Every time you ask a question, why? Every time you've noticed something out of place, it's research. I'm going to close with a little story about my daughter, who one day was sitting eating breakfast, and she was a real Raisin Bran freak. And for those of you who had me for class, you know this study. And she said, "Hey, this brand of Raisin Bran is different, and it doesn't have the same amount of raisins." That led to the Raisin Bran study. Hundreds of boxes of Raisin Bran, counting all the raisins, over buying the Kroger brand. So you've been doing research your whole life. Sometimes it's fun, and sometimes you just have a lot of Raisin Bran. Okay, dragons, I'm going to leave you with that. Let me know what you want to do, and I'll see you next week. It's a great day to be a dragon.